Well, good morning, afternoon, and evening to everybody around the world. This is Nick Palavita, and I'd like to welcome everybody to Media Monday on the IBM TV network. Let's introduce some of our guests. This person is actually the founder of the Bold TV network. He's also the CEO of the Bold TV network, hailing in from Florida. Let's bring in David Grasso. David, welcome to the show.
Always great to be here.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to have an interesting topic today. You'll love this one. Okay, from the world of authorship, this gentleman is actually a co-author of the famous book, The Millionaire Next Door. So it's selling over 4 million copies, plus the co-author of the book, Richer Than a Millionaire. Let's bring in our favorite professor, Bill Danko. Bill Danko, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yes, of course, I love your book. I should have you on the other show, which is Economics Monday. I'm going to try to get you on that because we're talking now about with the Honorable David M. Walker. Financial literacy has been a big one. And David Walker is much a proponent of that. So I'm going to try to get you on Economics Monday to talk a little about, I want to get your book into all the high schools in the United States. That's
Good
my
idea.
goal. Okay, so anyway, this person actually is the head of the Esports Network out of Texas. Let's bring in Mark Themig. Mark, welcome back to the show. Good to have you here. Hopefully you're coming in loud and clear.
Thanks.
Great.
You here?
Okay. This is our multi-billion-dollar hedge fund manager. He's interested in all sorts of topics. He's one of these people who are interested in everything, it seems like. Let's bring in our favorite from down under, Shaquille Latmer. Shaquille, welcome to the show. I'm going to get Bill on Economics Monday, now that financial literacy and David M. Walker are starting to come together. This gentleman is actually one of the head of the IBM TV networks. He actually does the online dinner party and other shows. Let's bring in our journalism major, Mark Lee. Mark, welcome back to the show. Right. Yeah, we're going to have journalists on this one because this is going to be a good one. Oh, speaking of which, I've got another journalist. Can you believe that? I thought that major's disappearing. We'll have to talk about that one also later on. This person's a Pulitzer Prize winner, New York Times best-selling author, and I have some of his favorite books. Let's bring in head of DC Reports, David K. Johnson. David, welcome to the show. Yeah. So we have what they call a full house. All right. And now the topic of today is actually defending Facebook. Now, why are we bringing this topic up? It's because Facebook is under assault. And by the way, Shaquille, you're the guy who brought this idea to my attention. Facebook is under assault, as well as social media is under assault by major media networks, starting with a 60-minute expose that, Facebook is doing tremendously disservice to the world. They have 2 billion followers, okay, and their disservice is this, which I thought was kind of cute. People get on Instagram, which is one of their subsidiary companies, and look at bodies on Instagram and say, well, those bodies aren't mine, and hence it's bad, and I'm having mental breakdowns and stuff like that. But wait a minute. Is that what's really going on, or is it really this? For those who go to NAPT, and David, David Grasso, I should see you at NAPT this year. Is this what's really going on? If you go to NAPT or any conventions in media, social media is vastly overtaking major media. And because of that, what's really going on behind the scenes is major media, such as CBS, want to bring down social media, and they're using their trumpets on CBS to do so by creating this illusion that social media is bad and major media is good. So I'm going to start with David, since you're running Bold TV, which, by the way, is something different. Social media, you can actually get on, you can get off. It's a two-way street. But major media, we've had this on our shows before, major media is controlled by 5 corporations in the United States. They own 90% of everything you see, feel, and do. Social media, like what you're doing, David, is a threat. Hence, we're going to figure a way to put you out of business no matter what, and we'll create an illusion you're bad for America to get rid of you. David Grasso, what are your thoughts on that? I'll give you the spotlight.
Well, follow the profit here. It's the name of my podcast, and it's the way I view the world, right? A lot of big tech companies have taken a lot of money out of the pockets of major media, like you just discussed, Viacom, CBS. Of course, they're pushing to bring down social media, and there is a lot of fodder there. There are a lot of mistakes that Facebook and other big platforms have made recently that have made them look very, very bad. But the bottom line is that major media is stuck in the Stone Ages, and we live in a world of transmedia, where media isn't just sitting in front of a television. It's gaming, it's consuming, it's interactive, and major media is an antiquated industry and is enormously jealous of the innovation and the know-how that exists in the social media space. So yes, of course, social media definitely needs scrutiny. I think major media is really stuck in the past and needs a lot of disruption. But as you said, because 5 major corporations basically control the space, it's very hard to change things or really introduce any new innovation when the old dinosaurs are guarding everything.
Right. Okay. Now I'm going to bring in, assuming he can come in, Mark. Since you run a media company, Esports Network, do you see an assault by major media, who's losing ground to social media, assault on social media, so that they can regain their rightful position as the 5 companies controlling 90% of the market and get rid of people like you, get rid of people like Dave Grasso, because you guys are a thorn in their side? Mark, you got to turn off your you need to turn on your speaker. I guess they already got rid of him. That was pretty quick.
It was censored already.
So let's bring in David K. Johnson, our Pulitzer Prize winner, and see what your thoughts are on major media assault on social media, which, by the way, they'll never discuss it as an assault.
Well, I don't see any assault at all. What I see is the ordinary routine coverage of new institutions and how they operate. I mean, the 60 Minutes piece by the whistleblower was no different than the piece they did on Big Tobacco with the whistleblower, the pieces they did back in the early days of that show, which has now been around almost 60 years, on abuses by oil companies and others. On the other hand, the attacks on some aspects of Facebook are completely ahistorical. One of the big points has been a lot written about, and TV news has done, is, teenage girls and body image. I can tell you, as the father of 5 daughters, that this is not a new issue, and it's not going to go away. It's part of being a teenage girl. Even if you were born with the looks that would put you on the cover of Vogue magazine or the old Playboy, you're going to have body issues. And the degree to which a place like Instagram enhances those issues, it's a problem. It's not a major problem. But I don't think any of this is motivated by what you suggest and David Grasso suggests. When TV came along in the late 1940s and early 50s, there was a lot of printed material back then, including scholarly studies, that this was the end of newspapers. And yet, who printed the schedules for the TV stations back in the day before we had 500 channels, and hired TV reporters and created whole sections of newspapers just to cover visual media newspapers? I think this is all just sort of standard evolution. On the other, and one other aspect of this, the traditional media, particularly newspapers, they've been idiots about the internet. They started off giving the product away when they had been charging for it, and they've never been able to really escape that model. And the only news organization that has overcome this, and is bigger now than when I left 13 years ago, is the New York Times, because of their unique position in the world. Look at the Philadelphia Inquirer today, where I used to work, the LA Times, where I work, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Dallas Morning News. They're all shrunken and aren't able to respond. What we should be concerned about there is the lack of having enough local reporters and state level reporters is a gift to the class of kleptocrats. That's all it is. It's a gift to those people, and corruption will flourish without local and regional newspapers.
Okay, that sounds like a good opening statement. So, Shaquille, what is your thoughts about major media attacking social media? Because when I saw the 60 Minutes report, I'm sorry, it was one-sided. It was not two-sided. It was completely, oh, here's these girls, they're on Instagram. There's nothing they could possibly do except have meltdown. Now, wait a minute, they could turn Instagram off. Okay, oh no, that would be way too much. Come on, guys. All right, Shaquille.
Their parents could actually, limit their time, but that's easier said than done. I think it's an interesting situation because David Cay Johnston, very, very talented reporter, but if I want to read an article of his, I'm going to have to go behind a paywall to access it. Mm-hmm. So his ability,
not a DC report,
not a DC reports, absolutely. Now, of course, for me sitting here in Australia, much more difficult to do. If I was to make something up and lie, David Cay Johnston has never worked for the New York Times. He has only ever worked for the Sydney Morning Herald. And I was to put that out there, that could go all over the world and there's nothing he can do about it and it's free. So, what are we actually talking about when we talk about big tech today? That, it's very interesting when we talk about, and I talk about this a lot, misinformation, one-sided, cancel culture, it's terrible. But let's just go back 10 or 15 years ago. That poor young lady, I think she was Canadian, who ended up committing suicide tragically. I think she was only 13 or 14 years old. And it was a big cry. There's been other cases like that. There's a big cry. Tech has to do something to protect our kids. And of course, as soon as they do try to do something, you're censoring content. So when legacy media has the opportunity to discredit new media or discredit tech, of course they're going to, because they want some of that market share back, I would suggest. The other thing I'll just quickly say, I was reading a couple of weeks ago about, I forget the philosopher, but he was complaining about printing presses, because in the old days, in order to get a book written, you had to get a scribe to actually do it by hand. And his complaint was that now you've got printing presses and all sorts of drivel will be published. And I think that idea hasn't changed much. It's just become more technologically advanced. That we sit there today and say, if we don't control or allow professional journalists to control what we read, anything will be published and it will destroy the minds of our youth. Well, we've been saying that for hundreds of years, maybe thousands.
Yeah. Mark, hopefully we can get you back in here since you have to turn your microphone back on. But you had the Esports Network. Do you see an assault by traditional media on social media? And that's part of the reason why Facebook's under attack. And it's like they can't respond. In other words, it's a one-way street. Mark.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, I've been having some bandwidth issues here, so I apologize for that. You know what? I think there is a lot of evolution going on the social media side right now. And, in part what's happening is people are also finding different ways to communicate. So, Twitch and other means of in-game community.
Of course, it looks like we've lost Mark again. It looks like he froze out again. So Bill.
But hopefully I was able to get that part in.
Yeah. Bill, Danko, what are your thoughts about this? Social media and traditional media, and one of their big complaints is that, Instagram, people look at it, they see their bodies aren't like theirs. And,
sorry, Nick, I think I'm losing you.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to drop.
Okay.
All right. Now, we certainly have a lot of fragile users on these various new platforms. I agree. Parental control is probably the answer. You can't stop it. It's out there.
Well, then my other question is this. Why did 60 Minutes not even mention parental control? In other words, I know I have 2 granddaughters, and here's what happens. Oh, this bothers you? Good. Goodbye, your cell phone.
Hey, Nick.
Why is it that they don't even mention that? Yeah, Mark.
Nick, how are we going to have parental control when we probably need children control. Because I can tell you as a person that has been involved in that space, Clubhouse, Fireside, and a number of the other things that, a lot of times it's the adults that are actually staying up till 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock that are on these media outlets and are actually engaged in a lot of conversation around news. And they're coming from all different sides of the political spectrum. They're talking about things that they are passionate about, whether that's things dealing with COVID, whether that's things dealing around economic plights that they may be in or not in, and all of that. But I can tell you that from conversations I've had with several of my friends, we sometimes sit there going like, yeah, we're working a regular job or maybe even working multiple jobs. And then we might be up till 3 or 4 or 5 having engaging conversations with each other, because humans, as a general rule, like to have some human connection. And because of COVID, it has opened up the world of social media, and it's actually gotten a lot of people to communicate in that way. So I think that's why a lot of these things are being created, because we definitely want that human touch. So yeah, I've made friends from all over the world, from California to Scotland and a number of other places. And of course, it's also the different time zones that they're at. So if I'm talking to somebody in Africa, it might be, 4 or 5. If I'm at 3 or 4 in the morning, it's actually their lunchtime. So there's a lot of those kind of conversations that are going on as well. And I do think that corporate America does understand what's going on, and that's why they are buying into these organizations and things of that nature. Let's look at Spotify, which has opened a Clubhouse competitor, and Clubhouse is an app that a lot of people are conversating in that regard. So they have opened up the Green Room, and the Green Room, it was opened by folks overseas, and then recently Google Alphabet bought them out, and then Mark Cuban got involved with Fireside, which is actually supposed to bring kind of this StreamYard element, which would be more video, because a lot of these apps are phone apps, and there are a lot of things that go on in that regard. And sometimes it's even interesting when you hear the conversations. I remember I was talking to a woman yesterday who's in the fashion industry, and she was actually enjoying Clubhouse more than Facebook, because she found that Facebook was even more a lot of minutia that she didn't want to hear. A lot of that kind of like, what I'm doing with my family, and that kind of like personal gossip kind of stuff, where she found that Clubhouse and some of the others were at least what people would consider directed conversations, whether it's a room in podcasting, or whether it's a room that might deal with your dating life, or whether it's a room that may deal with something around like personal finances. So it's more directed conversation in a lot of these apps. If you go and type in something that you're interested in, you can find it. Like I know that if David Kay wanted to find something that he wanted to investigate, he probably could type it in Clubhouse and find some experts in there to talk about it. As a matter of fact, I can tell you for a fact that over the last 2 months, probably about a good, I would guesstimate 20 to 30 of our guests on our shows have come directly from Clubhouse, and they've been
okay. Yeah. We're actually rating Clubhouse, and
Yes.
we're redistributing. One of our big redistribution points is Facebook groups, where content goes to these particular groups. And now Facebook, who we redistribute, is being attacked by major media, which doesn't surprise me, because the thing is, major media is going, well, we got to stop them somehow. So they created a whole litany of garbage on.
Nick, I've never in any newsroom ever heard anybody talk the way you're talking. That's just not how it works. What happened here is a whistleblower was going to go to Congress, was connected up with producers at CBS, and they went, this is going to draw a big audience. And, I can fault the presentation they made, just as I can many of the investigations that they've done, but it's no different in approach. And it's a good story for them. And as for the Facebook side of this not being presented,
That's right.
Facebook chose not to participate.
Right.
They were offered every opportunity. I can assure you, the lawyers read the letters in which they were offered every opportunity to participate, and they chose not to, because they decided it was in their interest not to participate.
Right.
I don't say this is an attack. This is just reporting on a whistleblower. Whistleblowers, I've spent my whole career dealing with whistleblowers.
David, when I listened to her whole argument, it was garbage. I didn't see anything that she said that she whistleblowed on that was anything.
Well, okay.
What's Facebook?
The Wall Street Journal has been running an expose of Facebook.
They're major media, please.
And it shows very clearly that internally what she says is correct. That
Of course.
internally they were they knew what certain problems were, and they lied to the public about what they were doing. That's all. And companies aren't perfect. Unions aren't perfect. None of us are perfect, but it's a legitimate subject for news coverage. I don't think it has anything to do with these guys are eating our lunch, and they are eating their lunch. Google much more than Google and Apple much more than Facebook.
Okay, you and I go to different
What's
meetings.
Facebook?
Okay, when
What's
I go to the NAPD meetings, they do talk about social media eating their lunch, and they do talk about how can we stop them. And now a great story comes by that we can slam social media. Let's put it on the air before anything else important. Now I listened to the story, I was going, this is like made up stuff. And some of the stuff they made was even exaggerated. Like, oh, boards of the directors are talking about making profits. Can you believe that? Duh, what else do you think they talk about? You don't think CBS and Viacom? And come on, David, let's get real here. That night, they're complaining about a little girl who looks at another girl who looks beautiful, and oh, it's destroying their mental health. That night, CBS then puts on 20 murders, and they're okay when we're okay with it.
Sure.
Why did
And
they mention
ABC
CBS's
runs
murders that they
horrible
put on
stuff
TV? They're
back to the right.
hypocritical.
What is Facebook going to do, or what's media going to do? Like, so Facebook comes out and says, we didn't do any of that. Well, that's no headline. Facebook says it didn't happen. What are the cameras going to do? Of course they're going to show 20 minutes. They're not going to go to a street and go, and breaking news on Smith Street, nobody got murdered. Nothing happened today. Like, you can't publish that. So, of course, it's going to be the allegation.
But CBS is not a bastion of wonderfulness. That evening, they're going to show murders, rapes, made up murders and rapes, and feed that garbage to America like that's okay. And then they're going to attack Facebook because, Instagram has different body types.
But as I said, what are they going to do? David K. Johnson, you've worked for a lot of media companies. I never have been a journalist other than in high school. Were you ever asked by an editor, David, can you please go and write a story about nothing having happened? Is that something that would sell? Is that the front page of any
In fact, there's an old saying in the newsroom, airplane takes off in New York, lands in Los Angeles, not news. Airplane takes off in New York and doesn't land, big news.
I mean, I can give you.
When we look at what...
But fundamentally, the 60 Minutes piece is about an insider who, in fact, took with her a lot of documents that show the company wasn't walking its talk. And Facebook's behavior has consistently been, when every moral choice has been presented to them, they seem to consistently make the wrong choice.
And CBS is clean.
No.
I mean, the thing is, it'd be different if it came from a different source.
But I had a question.
CBS,
But Nick, even the FBI
Stop.
the FBI employ serial killers to help them track down other people.
And by the way, on tonight's NCIS, there'll be 20 murders thrown in your face and bombs, and that's okay. So, by the way, Instagram and Facebook are bad. Come on.
But Nick, I had a question. It's actually geared toward David from Bolt, because one of the things that I think that I've noticed in everything that's very enjoyable with some of these apps and some of these kind of like creations is that there are standards that supposedly, and notice I said supposedly, Facebook and them put out there, whether that's around music, whether that's around sexuality, whether that's around a number of other things. What I have noticed is that a lot of these newer apps are a little bit, for lack of a better term, looser with the rules. I mean, shucks, there's a whole room in Clubhouse called Single in the City, which is basically a lot of people that are making shots at each other around relationships. And some of those can get very graphic. And I'll just be honest about it. It can get very graphic in those rooms. And there are others as well. I mean, there's a room that's called Cuffin', and you can look up what Cuffin's about and you'll know what that kind of room is. So to my buddy David from Bolt, isn't that one of the things that is happening is that these rooms are a little bit more wide open, and therefore you're able to have a lot more conversations that people enjoy because they want to have those kind of blue conversations and some of those conversations that they might have with their friends at home and everything, but it's a lot more less regulated from what I've seen. But I would love your thought on that as you actually run Bolt.
Yeah, well, this is the boat that everyone's missing, right? Is that there will be new social media platforms. And if, in fact, we regulate further Facebook, we will actually entrench them and create a landscape that's very similar to our big media landscape. If we do go ahead and repeal Section 230, which, of course, shields big platforms from users doing illegal things, we'll actually entrench Facebook's dominance. I want to remind everyone that Facebook would be very antiquated if it hadn't bought Instagram, which has been the major source of its growth. So if you want to make Facebook less competitive, prevent it from buying other entities like Instagram. And now, regarding what you two are fighting about, our main characters in this feed, both of what you're saying is slightly true, but I want to remind you, David K. Johnson, I'm a little younger than you. And in 2018, something happened that was big news in journalism, and that's Facebook changed its algorithm, and they have several times, right?
Right.
And that specific algorithm really affected publishers, specifically digital publishers like me.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I'm CEO of Bold TV and Bold TV became a nonprofit because of that algorithm change. We went from 100,000 views per video to statistically 0. So there is a lot of bad blood from journalists toward Facebook. And we cannot negate that, especially the higher up you go in the echelons. And everything you're saying is true. When Facebook has been presented with a quandary, they have tended to exhibit some great deal of moral failures. But what Nick is saying is right too. The higher up you go, the more it's like F Facebook. These people literally ate my lunch. There is a history of so much bad blood there. It's unbelievable. I saw newsrooms buzzing with people in Manhattan closed overnight. People lost their jobs. I almost lost my show. I still like Facebook. I was one of the first users. I have generally positive views of Facebook despite everything that's occurred. But yeah, the higher up you go, the more they hate Facebook.
How did Facebook change its algorithm? I'm aware they did, but I'm not sure that I understand what it exactly is that they did.
So basically, they told all content creators, so I moved to New York in 2016. I was a local news reporter in Texas before that. And back then, the zeitgeist was this as follows. You don't need a website. You can use Medium. You don't need your own website because also you have Facebook. And there's this thing called Facebook Live, and you should tool your whole business model around Facebook Live, right? And Twitter had Periscope, and, YouTube was telling creators to come on. Basically, everyone said, come into our ecosystem and don't worry about everything. You'll be able to monetize, and this is sustainable. Well, in 2018, they changed our algorithm to the point that it just crashed our whole traffic. We have built business models around this, and it killed so much journalism. The damage that was done to companies like Bold TV is immeasurable.
Well,
So
from their perspective, what were they doing in changing the algorithm? What was Facebook trying to accomplish, and what did the change do in the algorithm?
Well, there isn't a perspective here. Facebook said exactly what they were trying to do. They wanted to stop becoming more of a news site, and really that minutia that one of you was talking about, they wanted it to be peer-to-peer interactions, right? And that excluded content creators, which would have been fine had they not done all these jamborees, of which I went to many of them. I have a Facebook hoodie, and said, don't worry about it. Come into our ecosystem. Build your whole business around us. And then they screwed us royally. And I'm never going to easily forget that. Neither.
Wait, actually, that's a better story than what I saw in 60 Minutes, David.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
David?
That's a really good story. Screw that 60 Minutes story.
I've heard
is
for a
lame.
long time this
Can I just
story
ask
that
a-
they changed
yeah.
their algorithm, but I didn't understand
I think
what
Shaquille
they
had a
did. I'm
question for
sorry.
David.
Can I just ask a question here, though? What you've described, David, that sounds morally repugnant. However, what would the solution be? If we look to government in order to regulate, what would we do? Try to get government to legislate in such a way that the social media companies, Facebook or whoever, are compelled to have an algorithm that maintains a certain amount of traffic?
No, I'm not saying there is a solution to this. I agree with you. I would rather the government not regulate Facebook. That's how I started this conversation. I'm just saying the bad blood that Nick is talking about is a real thing. As much as
I didn't
all my
know that
friends
happened.
run Facebook's public policy team in Washington, a lot of my dear friends are high up there. I try to be pro Facebook, but a lot of times it's really hard because it's very personal.
Right.
But I think
I-
that's what people are still trying to discover and work out what they want to be. It sounds reasonable that they want to be a peer-to-peer a place, but they've also tried to make inroads into media, and they're sort of changing and chopping what they're doing. Same with YouTube, and same as many other media outlets and social media outlets. And so the question is that as tech reacts to public pressure and reacts to regulatory changes, what does that look like? And that's an unfortunate thing. But I certainly think that we need to look at ways of being able to make media and make content accessible to people through a medium that they're actually going to digest the information.
And sometimes the media that can be accessible can also be, and I think that my buddy from Bolt would agree with that, as he's the one that's of the younger generation and everything, it can also be quite annoying, because I know that in a lot of the spaces there are these kind of campaigns that are called engagement campaigns, and what they will do is they will get you to basically like and get everybody to follow each other left and right, and that can just go on forever and ever. And if you ever go into one of those engagement rooms, whether it's on Clubhouse, Green Room, Facebook, or whatever, it can be very annoying. That's the only way I can describe it and everything, because they are trying to get you to buy into this idea of building your following by getting everybody to like everybody, even though you may not necessarily like them. But the whole model is that if I like you and then you like me back, that we will build a bigger empire together. That's kind of like almost like a multi-level version of social media is the way that I look at it and everything. Would you agree with that kind of model, David, and everything? Because it almost reminds me of the multi-level marketing, but it's very prevalent in social media now.
Well,
Listen, Facebook has done a lot of good things. It's not all a bad story. And really, if you consider who they have as competitors these days, which is TikTok, TikTok doesn't give a rat's ass what they do to American children because they're based in China. So I want to remind everyone, the more we, tug on Facebook, which is not the villain in this, the more we miss the mark, which is, of course, TikTok and ByteDance.
There are some things we could do that don't involve directly regulating Facebook or other social media companies. We really need to have in our education system media literacy. The Finns and others have done a very good job of media literacy and teaching young people as they grow up critical thinking skills, how to understand media. That's one. Two, Facebook can have whatever content it wants, but if it is taking money to do things, then it's subject, our Supreme Court says, to closer scrutiny, even on First Amendment issues, because now we're into commercial speech. And I heard somebody from formerly with Facebook say on a radio show one day when I was driving that they could, if you wanted to buy an ad targeted at the following group, Google was the company referred to, they could find it for you. You wanted middle-aged, unmarried lesbians who own their own home and drive a Subaru. And they would go, oh yeah, we can slice and dice and get you exactly that group.
Right.
Okay, well, that's fine. But if you take money from Beijing or Tehran or Moscow to influence an American election, you belong in prison. And we should prosecute the people who do that. And we have the laws to do so, starting with the Foreign Registration Act, Foreign Agents Registration Act. But in terms of what's on the internet, I think that's a function of we have to learn how to adapt to this kind of social media and recognize what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah. But let's see, if you also have multiple outlets, this whole thing with Facebook starts going away. So like on IBM TV, we distribute through LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So we have multiple distribution platforms. And we're actually looking to distribute through a major media like CBS. And a couple of years ago, I actually talked to the president of CBS. Now I attack CBS because we don't have a contract with them anyway. So why do I care? To me, they're fair game. Once we get a contract with them, David, then guess what? I have to be a fool to talk against CBS.
Nick, you're picking on the nicest of all the media conglomerates.
The thing is,
probably does the best work out of all of them.
My experience, and when I see you at NAPTI, the beauty of what I do is I'm not reliant on the media for my income, livelihood, or future. Okay, my experience with the media industry is like what you had. It's not good. It's like I walked into a den of thieves and pirates. And I'm going like, this is the media industry in the United States. I know David K. Johnson may worship and adore them, but frankly, I don't. I was going, this is the worst industry I've ever seen in my bloody life.
Well,
and it's controlled.
Nick, if we want to complain about an industry, I would go after Disney, the family company, where all parents must, unless they're super poor, pay the Disney tax by buying Disney products and whatnot. And what does Disney put on TV? These two outrageous shows, The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, that are the most marriage ideas I can imagine. Yeah. And yet Disney, I mean, that's deeply offensive. I'll also defend their right to do it.
Yeah, right. No, I agree they have the right to do it.
So let me just.
They're so duplicitous.
You made a comment before about foreign entities influencing U.S. election outcomes. But let's just assume for a moment that it was American groups that were doing it, just for the sake of what I'm going to ask you. who's responsible at that point? Because is it the social media company, or is it the person who's actually paid the money? The reason I'm asking you that is that the media companies, as I understand that the exemptions that they've got in the law, is that they're not responsible for the content, so they can't be prosecuted for the content.
Right.
But the person with the content out there could be prosecuted for it. So if we start holding the media companies liable, then do they all of a sudden, they're going to have to look at all the content and they'll have to choose it, editorialize it, which is exactly what we're trying to prevent.
No, Shaq, the difference here is there's a huge difference between we'll post your comment. I mean, I post things on my Facebook account all the time, which I use to promote my books and DC Report. But if you're taking money for advertising, and it's not a de minimis amount of money, it's a significant amount of money. I would, let's say, define that as $100,000 and up. Then there are other laws that come into play. And you have to be accountable for commercial speech. And the Supreme Court's been very clear that political speech has the highest degree of freedom. It's pretty much unlimited. But commercial speech, if you are selling something designed to subvert or promote a revolution against the government, or to cheat people through criminal conduct, or to encourage criminal conduct, you're liable for that. And in fact, I got a guy sent to prison where he died for doing that.
But how would you prove? How would you prove that anybody is intending to subvert government? I mean, that sounds quite subjective when it comes to a matter of law and a matter of.
Actually, that's not very difficult to deal with.
And the thing is, I'm not sure if that freedom of speech is absolute, David, because look what Apple did to Parler. In other words, freedom of speech is the government can't interfere with you, but private industry can. So Apple and Facebook can shut you off. I've been shut off by Facebook many times. In other words, the thing is, they put me in Facebook prison. I've been in YouTube jail. I mean, the thing is, the private industry has unfettered ability to destroy your freedom of speech. It's the government that isn't allowed to destroy your freedom of speech.
I agree with you. The First Amendment is about government.
Right.
I'm describing the rules the court has set, however, about your speech. But if you're buying an ad, there's a record. Well, you called up, here's the ad you wanted. You have standards about that ad. Go try to buy in a major magazine, in Bloomberg Business News, a full-page ad for a legal whorehouse in Nevada. They're not going to sell it to you. They have advertising standards. They could, but they're not going to. But we have very clear laws that you cannot put foreign money into United States elections. Now, they're flawed laws. Toyota USA can legally contribute to an American presidential election, even though it's a company ultimately controlled in Japan. But this is an area I think we do need to pay attention to about Facebook and Google and the other entities. That's paid material, not freely posted material that people put up.
Yeah, but Facebook probably hasn't paid enough into this wonderful organization, the U.S. Senate, to stop all this stuff. But and the thing is, that's a whole another conversation. At least my experience going to Washington D.C. and being part of the 12th largest PAC, which is a political action committee, and making corporate donations in the amount of $600,000 a pop to U.S. senators so that we can have access and talk to them. I mean, and does this go on daily? We're only the 12th largest PAC. I got 12 of them ahead of me that are, so I've got to wait in line to give that $600,000 check. Do the senators respond? Absolutely, they do. And that's American politics. Why didn't 60 Minutes discuss that rather than attack Facebook?
They've done that story so many times about campaign.
I see. Well, I like David Graff.
One of the issues with any attempt to regulate anything. Sorry, David.
Well, my favorite comment on campaign finance was a leader of the Sikh community near Sacramento named Baines. And I asked Mr. Baines once about how he had held a series of fundraisers for like 6 presidential candidates. They'd all come to his farm, and they turned over lots of checks. And I said, so how does that go? Have you ever gotten what you wanted? He said, no, they take our money and then they ignore us.
Right. That is, by the way, that is a danger. Being on the PAC, giving money out, one of the dangers they ignore. But here's the counter. We actually met once a month to go over their positions and stuff and discuss them. And if they weren't moving in the right direction, guess what we did? We pulled their funding. So the thing is, it was almost like, I'm not going to say that we controlled the Senate of the United States of America. We absolutely didn't. There's 12 other packs ahead of us. That's called capitalism. But when it comes to the regular person who goes to school and learns about how the U.S. government works, they're completely oblivious. And it's the same reason why I think you have a good point. Media needs to also be taught at the elementary and middle school level, because they showed the deep fakes on 60 Minutes, which actually I thought was a good show. So I'll give them credit where credit is due. The deep fakes, when we started working with IBM 3 or 4 years ago, that's what we were working with. Artificial intelligence, where anybody here could show up like it was being done out in New Zealand, near where you're at, Shaq, where people could show up and basically be a deep fake. The technology is there. But what they were showing, and they didn't really show it too well, in the next 5 to 10 years, it's not only going to be there, it's going to be available for anybody here instantaneous with almost no cost. In other words, David Johnson, you don't have to show up anymore. I'll just bring your avatar, seriously.
Yeah.
And you're going to be plugged in through a intellectual property. This is what they're working on in New Zealand, a computer-based program. So you can ask and answer question through IBM Watson, so that David K. Johnson is not needed anymore. I've got the David K. Johnson avatar.
But Nick,
Let's go back to the
that technology's already here. It just
but I'm saying that's the complicated version. I think Shaquille had something he wanted to say.
Yeah, I just want to come back to the lobbying groups. I've got friends in governments all over the world, and I've spoken to friends of mine in federal government in the United States, and I actually asked them this years ago. I said, what's it like dealing with a lobbyist? Because I assumed that it'd be really hard to say no. And what I was told by several senators is, that's what we do all day. We say no to lobbyists. That's an easy thing to do. But what's a lot harder to do is to say no to a group like ALEC, because that's how these corporations get a lot of the things that they want done. And I found that really fascinating with ALEC, that corporations get to vote on what the legislation is going to be and then hand it over to a senator or a representative to table on the floor. Incredible use of power. And of course, when big corporations support regulations on themselves, you've always got to take that with a grain of salt, because oftentimes the more regulations a big corporation can put on itself, the harder it is for any other company to compete with them.
But just for the audience to know, ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council, and it's lawmakers around the country who deal with companies, mostly rather conservative and anti-regulation companies, the Koch brothers being a major example of that. That's been quite influential.
Well, Walmart was part of it. I forget the group, the CCA, that runs the prisons. There's been a whole heap, and I would dare suggest that if ALEC, I know that they do seem to have that conservative slant, but I would dare suggest that they probably hand bits of legislation or even opposing legislation to the Democrats to oppose what they've just told the Republicans to do. Because why wouldn't you, right? Because you control the fight, you control the narrative.
Well, I would argue that the fundamental thing ALEC has promoted is increased corporate power, less accountability, and less power to human beings. And that's part of a very large theme problem in our Supreme Court jurisprudence and in laws that are being passed, where we're granting more and more authority to corporations. The Supreme Court has granted religious rights to corporations and reducing the freedom and power of human beings.
Yeah, but the thing is, that's been going on for years, and you can argue that that's also the purpose of the parties, the Democrat and Republican Party, is they want to usurp individual liberties and push everybody to these two parties. Well, corporations, let's face it, that's a group of people. And so the thing is, the corporations receiving more power, it's just like in the companies I work with, we aggregate so that we have more power when we go into Washington, D.C. As a lobbyist, lobbyists are waste of time. I'm a lobbyist with a checkbook. So I sit there, here's a nice check. Plop, here's $600,000. Do you want to talk to me or no? $600,000, guess what? I got their attention, David. Okay, David, any Davids who are here. Okay, so I show up with my, look, I show up not just as a lobbyist, I show up with my magic checkbook. Okay, and then all of a sudden I get the ears of the people in Washington, D.C. If you show up as a lobbyist, you don't get the ear. And yes, we also show up with the legislation. Why do we do that? They don't. Do you see their staff? You know, they have like 12 people. Usually, these young people have no clue what they're doing. So they have nobody there to draft the legislation. I'm serious. This is how Washington D.C. works.
Yeah, but that 18-year-old intern is probably the one that wrote the legislation.
The good news is, Shaquille, they're always very attractive. Okay, one thing. If you want to know about body types, you have to pass a certain thing to be a staffer on Washington D.C. They're always very attractive, and they're always very young, and they have no clue what they're doing. So you hand them the legislation along with the check, and then you walk out the door, and the sad part is we may be waiting in line as other people are doing the same thing, and to me it's absolutely hilarious.
You say they have no idea what they're doing, but let's not forget that me and you have become big fans of a young millennial that is making a whole lot of money on YouTube by basically just telling us her stories and everything, and that is Miss Kelly Smart, that's going around doing a lot. Doing a lot of stories, just going around talking about her trips to California, her trips to Texas, what food she's eating, her dating habits, and a number of other things. And she is a major YouTube star and everything. And she even will go out there and show you how YouTube can make money on YouTube as well, because she's even given like lessons on how to do it.
Yeah. And Kelly, the important thing, she says you still make more money with sponsors than you do with YouTube. And see, this is what happens with YouTube and Facebook, especially Facebook. They don't create, at least currently, their own content. Now, I understand Dave Grasso. Their plan is to be a content creator, and they budgeted $1 billion for content. Of course, that switches their game, because their game for years is we distribute, we're not going to pay for any content. Now, at least from what I understand, we're going to start becoming a content creator. Well, that creates competition to companies like CBS and anybody else that's out there. I'm going to pick on CBS because they're the one who created the false expose. I think they should have interviewed you. They should have interviewed you, David, not that lady who goes, I'm a whistleblower.
Hey, David from Bolt, do you know who one of the leading new competitors is to LinkedIn? Because they just recently joined the force as well. I'll give you a clue. They're a major player in the world of economics in general, but they are now a major player in the space of live streaming.
Who is it from LinkedIn?
Amazon is doing a lot of live streaming now, and they're actually proposing going after live streamers.
But is Amazon doing a business style? Because LinkedIn's the reason it's good, it's business generally. Or is Amazon doing business, or are they allowing anything on? Or do you know, Mark?
Well, LinkedIn is doing both. They're doing a lot of people, and I mentioned this before, are using it as a way to address whatever their passion pointers or their passion calls. I know some people that have dealt with issues around abuse, like abuse in relationships and things of that nature, that are doing it on LinkedIn. And when I've looked at Amazon, I've seen similar shows. I've seen cooking shows. I've seen a number of things on Amazon. So they're using that model of definitely.
Mark, you run your show on LinkedIn.
Yeah, he does.
It shows up on my Apple Watch.
Yes.
No, he runs his show on LinkedIn, and I'm jealous because I have a hard time getting the shows on LinkedIn.
Do you get much of an audience through LinkedIn?
I actually do get a decent audience on LinkedIn. Not as good as my friend Brian Showman, who actually has thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, from around the country and everything. But yeah, I get a decent amount of traction off of LinkedIn. So yes, I do get quite a bit off of that. There's what they ask you to do in LinkedIn is what most people do, which is try to get that engagement. And definitely, I can't think of a show, whether it's my own show or Barbara H. Smith, which I know is one of Nick's favorites, that definitely gets a lot of conversations on that. So producing it for IBM TV, yes, I do channel it through my LinkedIn channel, because I had to beg and definitely do a lot of crying, but then eventually Brian showed me how to get it, and I finally got LinkedIn Live about a month and a half, 2 months ago. So yes, LinkedIn. And anything.
Mark, I can use your help because I have a hard time getting on LinkedIn. Yeah, go, David.
Okay, I've been quiet for a while. Okay, so here's how this is going to go. Okay, so number one, we're missing half of the conversation with money in politics, right? Where does that money go, right? It goes to the candidates to run again, who then give it to media, who then use it for the lobbyists, who then, start the cycle over again. So I wanted to mention that so that we're thinking about this holistically and not just in a vacuum, right? Yep.
Right.
It's the revolving door. It's American capitalism. It has its pros and cons. I tend to be of the opinion that at least we're talking about it here in the United States. In places like West Western Europe, it's just assumed that, big companies and the government just talk to each other, and that's just the way things work. As far as Facebook goes, Facebook does not make any of its own content. It has something called a watch brand, and they tend to select people who already make content, including your favorite network, Nick, CBS. And they go ahead and have green lighted a lot of content for their watch brand, but still made by third parties. I also want to remind everyone that Mark Zuckerberg, before all this was going on, was running around talking something about the metaverse, which, remember, Facebook is worth $1 trillion, not because of that blue platform, which a lot of boomers like to talk about Trump on. It's worth $1 trillion because it's very forward facing. One of those brands is Instagram, WhatsApp, and brands that have yet to exist, which is in stuff like the metaverse. So when we think about Facebook, we should not think about the platform that most of us interact with, because that's probably not the future of the company.
And I have shocking news for Shaquille, because I actually was on a call yesterday. Shaquille, you will be shocked to know that there are metaverses, and yes, there is a black metaverse. Somebody out of Raleigh and somebody out of Virginia. So they are creating a whole metaverse universe that is supposed to be geared primarily to the African-American population. And yes, they do call it the black metaverse, similar to Black Twitter. So that is what they call it and everything, and it is out there.
Right. So we want parents to control their kids' use of phones, and so they take the phones off, and the 13-year-olds looking at Instagram on their watch is what I've learned from David K. Johnson. That's
what that's where they're going to do in China. They're limiting their kids to 3 hours.
Yeah, but you take their phone off them, they've got the watch, they've got some other device.
You tell me how that's going to work in China. I know that Xi Jinping goes, enough of this social media garbage. We're going to give you 3 hours to do gaming. I think it is, they do gaming, and then that's it. Okay, and I'm glad he said that to 1.6 billion people. Now, how is he going to manage that? I have no clue. Manage teenagers in China. That's going to be a great one.
I want to ask Bill Danko a question, because we haven't been hearing from Bill. Bill, the people whom you have studied and written about are mostly in sort of traditional businesses, metal bending, selling automobiles, right? Car dealerships. Is there anything important about how traditional business prior to the digital age is being affected by this that we should think about, being affected by the social media companies and the multiplying universes of digital platforms?
Yeah, well, we're we're still going to need many of these, hard products to use. But I was surprised looking at the new Forbes 400 list on how many people were making their money on cryptocurrency.
Yeah,
billions. So, I mean, clearly there's a digital thread that's emerging here, but notwithstanding the fact, what is digital currency and what can it do for an economy? But we're still going to need housing and all the other hard goods. So no, I still believe in the idea that so many millionaires have made their money on is, work, save, and invest. It's as simple as that. That's never going to go away. All this other stuff is a sideshow, I think.
Hey, David from Bolt, he actually brought up an interesting point, which is that digital currency. And I just got my first digital currency recently because a friend of mine gave me an NFT, and actually I'm helping another friend with their NFTs. But a lot of people, they hear NFTs, and even in the artist community, they see it as a way to actually eliminate the middleman. Every time I hear a presentation, that's what they're saying, is they're eliminating the middleman. But for those that are watching our Media Monday, can you give a maybe succinct explanation of it? Because like I said, I got one and I'm still not sure what I've got, other than I've got a great piece of music and everything, but I do know that I've got my first NFT.
Well, it stands for non-fungible token, and all it is the digitalization of an asset, right? And you're tokenizing an asset, and we're going to see the tokenization of everything, right? So let's say I draw a picture, right? I can scan it, and now you own the digital version of this, and it's fungible, meaning it's dispersed, non-fungible, meaning it's all in one place. So you own the digital asset, and that tends to be an investment. And that's all it is. It is not a cryptocurrency, although it's often compared to cryptocurrency. And I agree with what what Bill just said. I think the real economy is more relevant than ever. And people tend to forget that, especially amidst a housing crisis, supply chain mismanagement, the end game for outsourcing, environmental problems, a climate problem. Really, the digital world is very profitable because you don't have to make real things. I look forward to being a digital entrepreneur, but notwithstanding real entrepreneurship, making widgets, bending metal, building houses, felling trees is going to be more relevant than ever in the coming decades.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Nick, you forgot one of our most popular topics on the show that we tried to do last week that we didn't quite get to, but I didn't know if you want to bring it maybe on next week, but that's that concept that you said that you didn't know that we still had them. But yes, there are still banned books here in the United States. And there are still several banned books around, including some banned books that might surprise you, because I know on the ALA latest list, which is the American Library Association, they had books such as To Kill a Mockingbird and things like Of Mice and Man and The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and they gave you different reasons why they banned him. Now, they did have some that were race-oriented and things of that nature, but Of Mice and Man was banned because it was challenged for its racial slurs and racist stereotypes and their negative effect on students. The Bluest Eye was banned and challenged because it was considered sexually explicit and depicts child sex abuse. And To Kill a Mockingbird was banned and challenged for racial slurs and their negative effect on students, featuring a white savior character and its perception of the Black experience. Now, like I said, there were other books that people may find easier to remember, like George, which was challenged and banned and restricted for its LGBTQIA content and conflicting with a religious viewpoint and not reflecting on the values of our community. And a person I'm trying to get on one of our shows, EBM X Zindi, whose book Stamped Racism and Anti-Racism and You was banned because of the author's public statements and because of claims that the book contains selective storytelling incidences and does not encompass racism against all people. And also banned was a book called The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie, who also did a great movie called Smoke Signals. And that was banned and challenged for profanity, sexual references, and allegations of sexual misconduct on the part of the author. So those are some of the reasons. There was also one called Something Happened in Our Town, a child story about racial injustice by Marianne Solano, Marietta Collins, and Anne Hazard, illustrated by Jennifer Zivion, and that was challenged for its divisive language and because it was thought to promote anti-police views. So that's according to the AL.
Well, we're going to have to go now, but the thing is, we're going to have to bring up this banned book stuff. I actually am not really familiar with. I got a lot of books. I don't know which ones are banned. I guess it's The Millionaire Next Door because no one reads it, and no one wants to be a millionaire in the United States by doing the hard work. But other than that, the banned books, I think, is a great topic that we're
going to make 2 million, right? So the government can take half of it.
Yeah, that's true. We learned that afterwards. That's the other part. But we do want to thank our panel, Dave Grasso from the Bold TV Network, Bill Danko, Richer Than a Millionaire, and The Millionaire Next Door, Shaquille Latmer from Down Under, our billion-dollar hedge fund manager, David K. Johnson, Pulitzer Prize winner, New York Times bestseller, waiting for your book to come out. I hope it's not
might be banned as well.
It might be banned as well. And Mark Lee from the IBM TV Network. And we'll see you next week on Media Monday on the IBM TV Network. Thanks, everybody. Bye.